Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. This is Hannah Zuberi back with another episode of Justice for All Now. You're watching us on Muslim Network TV, on Galaxy 19, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and soon Apple TV. So despite the countries being the country's largest religious minorities, Indian Muslim communities have been frequently subjected to violent attacks and assault by right-wing Hindu nationalists. And we talk about that a lot on this show. However, today I wanted to concentrate on another level of persecution, another community that has been persecuted in India. And ever since the current ruling party took power in 2014, incidents against Christians have increased in India. And Hindu radicals often attack Christians with little to no consequences. The view of these particular Hindu nationalists who live under the Hindutva ideology is that to be Indian is to be Hindu. So any other faith, including Christianity, is viewed as non-Indian. Also, converts to Christianity from Hindu backgrounds or tribal religions are often extremely persecuted by their family members and communities. So today I wanted to invite someone that knows this topic really well and can educate us and talk about what his community in India has gone through, and also share with us what about Indian American Christians in the United States. This is something, we wanted to, this is what I call truly powerful interfaith work, where we're joining together to break down systems of hate and to spread love amongst communities. So I'm really honored to welcome here today John Prabhudas. John is currently the president of the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations, which is often known by its initials, FICONA. And it's a national umbrella organization of Indian American Christians and of those who are interested in issues affecting Indian Christians. John was one of the charter members in the year 2000. He was elected as the 6th president in 2014. And, to tell you a little bit more about John, in 1991, he started as a grassroots organizer and an associate of Reverend Jeff Snyder, the executive director of the Apostolic Coalition, which Apostolic. Thank you so much, John. Which is a national public policy advocacy organization of conservative Christian movement in the United States with almost 7 million followers. So thank you so much for being here today, John, and we're looking forward to a great discussion about currently what is happening in India with Christians and historically what has been the treatment of Christians in India.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Hannah. So just a small correction. Mm-hmm. I stepped down from the presidentship last year.
Okay.
I'm the chairman of the board.
Okay.
The current president is Dr. Koshi George from New York.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for letting us know that. Now, tell us more about this organization. So this is an umbrella organization of majority of Indian American churches. How many churches are there here in the United States?
We have close to 900 to a little over 1,000 churches, depending on how you count them. Mm-hmm. Each city, for example, New York itself has more than 200 Indian ethnic churches. Mm-hmm. But most of the Indian American Christians do have a fellowship in their linguistic church. I mean, what I mean by that is that in India you have several languages. Mm-hmm. So the Tamil-speaking people will be gathering, and then you have between them you have the Pentecostals, evangelicals, are Protestant mainstream, and then you have Catholic. So different types of uh, congregations. So if you count all that just in New York alone, you will have more than 200, 250 different churches. Washington D.C. has about 40 plus, and but most of our members do attend members of regular mainstream churches. This is mainly for their children to be involved with the community. So that's kind of a reason why these churches are popular. Our organization, of course, represents over 1 million Indian Americans living across the U.S. and United and Canada. We live. Our members are there in pretty much every single state, including Hawaii and Alaska. Mostly professionals. Quite a few are business people, but overall, if you can look at them, and we would fit into that general Indian migrant community in the U.S. So we'll fall in that the major subsect. But the reason for the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations was not even necessary until 1990, 1991. I'm sorry, in 2000, 1999 and 2000, because when the BJP first came to power, the Hindu Nationalist Party in India, when it first came to power in Delhi, there were lots of attacks against Christians in the place called Gujarat, where the current Prime Minister comes from, Mr. Modi comes from. So as a concern, a bunch of not only Catholics, but also mainstream and evangelical church leadership in Washington got together and wanted to do something about it. And long story short, 20 years later, we have been sometimes active, sometimes not so active. Not so active, the reason I say that is because for example, in Delhi, if we have a government that is committed to the pluralism and protecting the rights of the Christian and other religious minorities, then they do most of the work. We don't have to be up in arms all the time about it. But then when the Hindu Nationalist Party comes to power, this time Mr. Modi has come to power, then the attacks on Christians actually doesn't really change much. But what changes is the administrative protection for the people that carry out these violent attacks against the Christians and also Muslims and Dalits. That becomes a problem. So there is no prosecution, there is no justice. So the victims often, if they go to the police, they end up being charged with a crime that they are the victim of.
Oh wow! Okay.
So that becomes a vicious cycle, and there are we have legal teams on the ground that are able to provide legal help. But then when a government is actively supporting a kind of a campaign, if you will, against a small group of people, doesn't matter whether it's a Christians in a Muslim country or a Hindus in a Muslim country or Muslims in a Hindu country. When a target like that happens, then it's very difficult for private organizations, even if they are influential, it's very difficult to survive. And that's the concern that we have. I mean, church in India is not just an European church. Church in India is a 2,000-year-old church. The first church was created or established by Apostle Thomas, one of the 12 disciples of Christ, the doubting Thomas. When he came to India, he's considered to be the apostle to India. In his second trip, he landed in the southern parts of India where Malabar is, and then he was actually killed and died as a martyr in the city of Chennai now, which is a there are other places in. I'm sorry, I had to turn that off. Did not pay attention to it. Let me turn it off so that we don't run into that issue again. So we do have a concern on that particular area. So whenever we could highlight the concerns that affects the Indian Christians.
Mm-hmm.
It also affects the Indian Muslims. There is a handful of Parsis, a few Jewish people, Jewish people who have chosen to stay back in India instead of going to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And you have 300 million Dalit who are not considered technically Hindu.
Exactly.
So all that thing plays in, and that is the struggle now, and to get Washington and the Western countries to understand the complexity in the problem is, to say the least, is challenging.
And what we've seen is like a lot of times state officials are often thinking of a India under perhaps Congress rule, or perhaps they aren't really realizing the extent of where these feelers go out, like this ideology, how broadly it has spread in the country. I mean, a lot of people who regularly used to go to India come back saying, we don't recognize it anymore. This is not the place that we grew up in. This is not the place that we were raised in, or went to college, university in. And that's a theme that I keep hearing. Do you relate to that theme, or do you think that the persecution has always been there?
No, their feeling is absolutely justifiable. The reason I'm saying that is, see, I come from the southern parts of the subcontinent,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very different from what happened in the northern parts of the subcontinent. As early as, if you want to go historically, 13th and 14th centuries, when the armies of what's his name? The Muslim armies, basically coming from Afghanistan and across the Hindu Kush mountains, when they were coming in, the people today feel that it just happened a generation ago. I mean, the feelings are very alive, and it is being fed all the time by political leaders as something that needs to be corrected. And so there's a good number of people who are feeling so. And as a matter of, you mentioned the Congress Party. The Congress Party also has people who are loyal to that kind of an ideology. But Gandhi, during the independence movement, was very certain about what kind of a state that he wanted to establish, and his struggle was to create an inclusive. Because when he traveled across the country, I mean, he comes from South Africa. I mean, if you know the story, if he comes from South Africa, he was in South Africa for a long time. After finishing his barrister training in UK, he goes to South Africa, and from there he has this experience on the train overnight, and then he changes his life, his outlook. Then he comes to India. He lands in Bombay, and people are asking him to be the leader of the independence movement. And then he said, well, I don't know these people. So he takes a train ride across the country and sees that it is not one country. It is a combination of, it's a convolution of different countries and kingdoms and principalities. something like a European Union.
Mm-hmm.
And so he understands that a Hindi-speaking Hindu Brahmin ideology is not going to work.
Mm.
They're only about 4 or 5%, maybe maximum 10% in some areas. But then there is large sections of the people who do not speak in the same language. There are 300, 400 different dialects and languages. Officially, right now, you have more than 20 different languages. So, with all that confusion, he says India can only be a united country if it adopts to be a liberal democracy.
Mm.
Without that, India cannot be cohesive. Cannot because it's a nation of nations.
Oh.
And that ideology, but the idea that the RSS and the BJP, the Hindu nationalists have is a different idea. They say that the one factor that unites the whole subcontinent is the faith,
Mm.
the Hindu faith or the Brahminic religion, because that has become the dominant faith during a certain period in the history. So they believe that the only thing that could bring this all together would be a faith, okay? A faith identity, and they believe in it. I mean, they honestly believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a struggle between two different ideologies, and and that's how a lot of and in 1947, when India became an independent country, unfortunately, Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted to have a separate country. He thought that one day the Hindus are going to take over,
Mm-hmm.
and that religiously the Muslims will be subjected to unequal treatment. Was his concern. So he asked for a separate country, and that becomes a major grievance for the Hindu nationalists, because for them the cradle of their civilization is the Sindh Valley, and the Sindh Valley had to go with Pakistan. So they lost the mother. I mean, when you hear them talking about it, they would say their motherland is butchered.
So that whole Mohenjo-daro area where the birth of
Yeah. So that is because non-Indic religions, namely Islam, came into the country, and because of that, India was divided. And that's the same argument that they have today, to say that if you allow the Christians to propagate and allow them to convert, or allow the people to convert to Christian faith, then conceptually it is possible for one area to become a majority Christians, would eventually ask for a separate nation. So that becomes a driving force for them to really go after this.
And then, so it's not even I'm going to talk about a little bit about the violence and the persecution, but let's talk about it from a systematic point of view first. Like, so there's legislation in Indian law that perpetuates this persecution. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I believe you are referring to the Citizenship Amendment Act.
Actually, I wanted to ask more about the anti-conversion laws and state laws that make it really hard for people to practice, Christians to practice their faith. And there's that sort of legislation that's at state level.
Yes, the anti-conversion laws, ironically, they call it the Religious Freedom Act. Mm-hmm. It is something that driven by the RSS ideology to stop people from converting to faith from Hindus and not from another faith to Hinduism. So that is why we are challenging it on the legality, constitutionality of that laws. But with the makeup of the U.S. Indian Supreme Court today, I don't expect any miracles from them at this time. they don't necessarily tell you the conversion is banned.
Okay.
And one time I remember talking to one Mr. Rajnath Singh. He was at that time the president of the BJP. And we had a very open discussion, a private discussion at his home. And he kept saying that, look, we means the BJP, is for the freedom of religion, in the sense people should have the right to convert, follow any faith that they want to. But then he said, well, we don't, but at the same time, we don't like people like Benny Hinn, for example, coming to India and converting 300,000 people in one night. I said, come on, you should be. If you really believe that, there is something fundamentally wrong here. And he said, no, you look at his website, and that's what he claims. I mean, what he claims is not necessarily true. But then his question is, why is he claiming it? He's claiming it because he needs to show his followers that he is being effective. And then he said, then what about these 400,000 people that showed up in his meeting? And my question to him is that the Christianity has been in India for 2,000 years. And if you think there are not 400,000 people Christians in the city of Bangalore, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the Christian faith. So that's a kind of an argument that they use to say that the Christian agencies and Christian organizations, for example, even the Compassion International, they use the same argument to throw out Compassion International from India. Their argument is that you're using financial assistance to seek vulnerable people and make them feel obligated to come to the church. Make them feel obligated to attend a Christian event. So that's a soft pressure on them. It's an argument that they have. I thought about it.
But this is very normal. Like when you go to the subcontinent, there are many hospitals that have been created by Christians. There are a lot of schools. The Catholic school system in the subcontinent is really well known. So this isn't something new. So why the push to? So what is the sudden push against evangelicals in India?
It's the sudden push. See, for example, in the north. You have to create an enemy to galvanize the support among the majority people. And because it's not the love that unites people, it's the hate that unites people. It's more powerful than, Mother Teresa can go around the world, but she's not going to unite the whole country, whole world. But somebody who can speak hateful message against any particular group could galvanize the support from the other population. So for them in the north, it is obviously the Muslim people, because the northern Hindu population feels that they have been wronged by the Muslims for several generations. That's why when Narendra Modi took office first time, he said, for the first time in 800 years, India is finally free. He made a statement, very profound statement to make. That means that he did not believe that his predecessor, Mr. Vajpayee, from his own party, when he was the prime minister, India was not free. So, but he can convince the people. I mean, he's very good in communicating. But in the south, you don't have that problem. In the southern parts of the country, especially Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra, Karnataka, in these areas, we didn't have the negative impact of the partition as late as 1947. But in the south, if you go to Kerala, only if you ask a person's name, you will see whether they are a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu. Otherwise, there will be neighbors. In Tamil Nadu, if you go, there is a level of affinity between the communities that you don't see actually in the north. And so in the south, for you to create a wedge between the Hindus and the other is not the Muslims, but you can use the conversion as an issue. So that becomes a tool to, but it is, so far it has failed, luckily. So far the the public has rejected attacks on Christians on that basis. But they're saying, it's a matter of time. You keep at it, you keep pushing, you keep talking about it, keep saying that they are converting. Eventually the public will start believing in it.
Exactly. And we've seen that rhetoric and the fear that it fuels, that they're coming in and they're taking over, and it's also like the empowerment of some of the. It's also that, as well as a class issue as well, in some cases. So in 2016 to 2019, there was a recorded 1,700 more and plus cases of hate crimes across 25 states and 3 union territories, according to a report. And the higher number of these cases seem to be in 2018. So they seem to be increasing every year. So supporting your point that as you keep pushing this rhetoric, then the hate crimes will keep increasing. What are the nature of most of these crimes? Do you guys monitor that at your organization? And what sort of things are you seeing?
The attacks on Christians have definitely increased. That's because the administrative support that they call it Shaka, the grassroots level RSS unit at the village level, are getting more and more empowered. They are getting administrative support. They are getting police support. They are able to go and convince the magistrates about their positions, which was not case until very recently, you can say, in most cases. So that is definitely fueling. And then also you have a money power. And I'm told when the attacks were taking place, the last year and the year before, Tamil Nadu was the top state where a number of attacks against the Christians took place. And when we were analyzing it, why Tamil Nadu? It was not by the public. It was by the paid employees of they are volunteers, they call them, but the financial infusion was there, in the sense, if you can go on an attack, stop a worship at a church, or go and disturb a Christian school, for example, then you videotape it, give it to the RSS leadership, you get paid for it. So there was a financial backing, a very systematic financial program behind it. And that was, when that came to our attention, we talked about it with officials in Washington. But in Washington, we can do only so much. We are not going to be able to do policing or law enforcement, in another country. But we could have a dialogue going with that country. So that is one of the reasons why you see a spike in the attacks. Yes, we are monitoring these attacks because we have, on the ground, we have our partners, dozens of partners, if you will, in each state that keep these informations collected, tabulated, and share with everyone. And so in that sense, we are closely monitoring what's happening. Our concern is that if we don't do it, I argue this in Washington. I said, look, forget the Christians, forget even the Muslims, because if you look around the world, I mean, you look at Nigeria, you look at Hong Kong, you look at North Korea. I mean, places are going to hell in a handbasket. It's really
Rising across the
bad.
world.
I mean, Sudan or even Nigeria is really bad. I mean, the kind of stories that I hear from Nigeria is unbelievable. So there is only so much information people in Washington can handle, and then there's going to be a point when they are going to start saying, well, we feel sorry for you, we'll pray for you maximum. And there's nothing more they can,
Mhm.
because as long as it stays as a problem in those shores, it doesn't affect Washington directly.
Mhm.
Now, what I'm saying is that if we don't pay attention to this and take corrective measures, or even to discourage the destructive path that the largest democracy that we proudly call as the largest democracy and the second most populous nation. And in India, they like to say they are the third largest, fourth largest economy in the world and all that thing. That's all fine. But if we don't pay attention to it, and if we go along with the trend, then India has no option but to implode.
Mm.
And the reason I'm saying that is because India is not a single monolithic nation state. Even England is three nations. We
Mhm.
have
Where
Wales, Scotland, and England. Um, you have that friction always in English politics. The same thing with any country. If one particular dominant group tries to impose their ideology, whether it's a communist Soviet Union or any other country in the world, if they try to impose their um, uh, one group's ideology on the others, eventually it will break up.
yeah.
And if there is no, I mean, that's what people like. You can read Samuel Huntington and others and see how this identity politics come into play. So in India, it's not. This is very pronounced. As a matter of fact, if I, as a Tamil, if I go to my neighboring state, I cannot understand what they're talking about. Their food
Mm.
is different. Their culture is very different, except the Sanskrit words that they use to certain gods and goddesses.
Mm.
Everything else is different.
Interesting.
So I tell people in Washington, don't you ever assume or take it for granted that India is one monolithic state.
Mm.
It is not. And if it implodes, I mean, when a country like Pakistan implodes, we have concerns about what happens to the world.
Mhm.
And wait until when India implodes. If it does, it will be a nightmare to American interest in the Indian Ocean corridor, to world economy, to the world order. It's going to be a major threat.
Mhm.
Because India is not a small country to say, well, it's a failed state. Let's
Yeah.
not worry about it for now. And that is why Washington should wake up. Not. I mean, I would, even though I'm the chairman of the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations, I would still say, do not do it for the Indian Christian. Do it for your own self, for your own interest. If you don't understand it, say look at China, for example. I mean, I don't want to do a monologue all the time, and I want to hear what you have to say. But look at China. China 25 years ago, when Tiananmen Square happened, for example, there were. I mean, I was in Washington D.C. at the time, listening to people arguing back and forth all day, all night, and I had people arguing, both diplomats, academic scholars from universities, and political leaders, arguing in Washington in committee rooms and in the National Press Club and in different think tanks that we should never punish China for what they have done in Tiananmen
Mhm.
Square. We should not in any way put out a report that would make them upset about. So what do? They said if you do that, then you lose your leverage. On the other hand, if you give them a trade benefit and if you give them technology that they're looking for, you will have a leverage to go and tell them friendly and say, look, please don't do this thing. You will have more. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're looking at it and sitting and sitting on the high chair and listening to somebody talking like it makes perfect sense. And that's the way Washington thinks. And that's what I'm saying. 25 years later, we are sitting here and thinking about China
Exactly.
and say, well, geez, we could have done something 25
Exactly.
years ago.
And that's what we don't want Mike Pompeo to leave, that legacy, that he was the Secretary of State that oversaw, the undoing of India happened under Mike Pompeo's, reign. And this is something else. Like, let's talk a little bit about what. So you're also the chair of the newly formed International Religious Freedom Roundtable on India.
I'm the India Working Group, co-chair of the India Working Group. We have Ajit Sahi and Raju Gopal as two different co-chairs, so we're three.
That's great. So what is the work of the working group? And disclaimer, I sit on that working group too, so just letting our audience know that. But let's talk about some of the things that we want, as we're concerned about religious freedom everywhere in the world, but particularly India. What are some of the things that we are asking here as Americans, asking our State Department?
Well, what we are asking in the particularly in this in the next 2-3 weeks, the working group has India Working Group within the International Religious Freedom Roundtable in Washington has a certain goals to achieve. That is to say that the State Department has already released their report, the annual report on international religious freedom. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom released their report earlier. And in that report, they have recommended that India be designated as a country of particular concern for the way in which it is going. It's the world community to stop and take stock of what's happening in India. That is one thing. But then the State Department came up with its report. Now, the Secretary of State has to make a determination within 90 days of releasing that report, whether or not India should be actually listed as a country of particular concern. In the past, the State Department has resisted, saying a lot of different reasons. One of them was that India is a democracy, unlike China. But all other arguments for not doing anything about the report is exactly the carbon copy of the arguments that was made 25 years ago in regards to China. There's nothing else. I mean, it's the same argument. It's a deja vu all over again. Now, if the State Department should say that India is, of course, a country of particular concern, but then it gives us the leverage to say, like yesterday, Mike Pompeo issued sanctions against 2 or 3 generals and Communist Party officials who are directly responsible for
the strategy, the regime. This was
Uyghurs. So that kind of possibilities becomes an option to target particular individuals who are extremely venomous. That would send because in India they say 1 out of every 6 households, 1 person from every 6 households, out of every 6 households is in the U.S. They live in the U.S. So it's an enormous impact. So imagine if the Secretary of State could say, well, such and such person who said such and such thing against Indian Christians or Indian Muslims or Indian Dalits, or who was involved in the tortured death of a Dalit, for example, will not be eligible to become are eligible to get a US visa to travel.
Mhm.
It not only affects, it sends a very powerful message to the rest of them, but he is going to think about, because definitely if somebody is in office somewhere, their kids are either studying here or working here in the US. So it will have a
Exactly. And when you look at the freedoms that are here, like the fact that an Indian embassy employee can travel anywhere in the 50 states, is allowed to go wherever they want. No one is going to be following them around and saying, you can't enter this state, or you can't go and monitor, a Black Lives Matter protest that's taking place in Louisville, right? But the U.S. embassy people, our staff, are not allowed to travel anywhere they want in India. Another thing
that,
that
yeah.
another thing that brings me up is like the fact that the USURF commissioners are not granted visas to go and visit India. So how this language that is used about friendly nations, and it seems like a very lopsided relationship. And to me, just observing this from.
Yes. Yes, you are absolutely right. We have raised that particular issue with officials several times, and they have a valid point. They say, look, we have to show, be an example for them. We don't want to lower our standard to somebody else's.
Mhm.
Then there will be no difference between. I mean, that's a very lofty ideal, very appreciable thing, but that's not the way it is working. I mean, what's happening is the U.S. is taken for granted, and there are people who think that the U.S. report, the putting out the report, doesn't matter because they have other influence. I mean, like for example, the foreign minister had the audacity. The Indian foreign minister had the audacity to go and tell a member of parliament that ignore the U.S. Commission's report because the administration and the State Department is with them. The Congress and the administration is with them, with Modi, and that's what damaging to the reputation and the stature of the United States in the international forum. They need to understand, the officials in Washington need to understand that they are being sullied, and their own words are not taken seriously because they themselves refuse to take their report seriously, their own report seriously.
That is so true. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Hindutva lobby here in the United States, because that is also a very strong force in why perhaps many of our Congress people feel like their hands are tied. Senators feel like their hands are tied. The State Department also tiptoes around this. So, what has been your experience in dealing with the lobby? Number one, and number two. Well, let's talk about that, and then I wanted to ask. You've lived here a really long time. You've been really involved with Indian American, just the diaspora over here, and I wanted to. What are relations like between Indian American and of different faiths? Are you seeing Hindus of Indian origin in the United States standing up for these freedoms that they take for granted over here? A lot of them are extremely progressive. When we see them on the streets for a lot of protests and stuff. So, so those are the two things that I wanted to talk about as we're wrapping up.
Yeah, it's a good question. See, the Indian American community in general has roughly about 20% Christians
Mhm,
and about 50% Hindu by faith,
mhm,
and the rest of them are Dalits and Muslims and Sikhs and so on.
mhm,
Now, what's the problem with people like the Hindu America Foundation, for example? I don't want to single them out, but people like that. There are dozens of similar organizations that are very quietly working. They create a banner just for an occasion and then they drop it. So those kind of people try to tell the policymakers and the elected officials in Washington that all those look like Indians are Hindus, which is far from true. And unfortunately, what has happened is that majority of this India interest groups, if you will, have been brought under the care or brought under the ideology of the Hindu nationalism, because they honestly believe that that's the only party that is speaking for the rights of the Hindus in India. Otherwise, the Hindus will become marginalized. They will become a minority, and all that boogeyman theologies, the concepts, ideas are floating around. So people are, and there's a guilt feeling too, that also plays in for a lot of immigrants, that they want to do something about for their homeland. So as a matter of fact, these organizations come under the heavy influence of the nationalist groups.
Mm.
So less than half of the 50% of the Indian Americans actually may agree with the Hindu nationalist view.
Mm-hmm.
So that puts it less than 10 to 15% of the total Indian American population in the US. But that's not what they will claim. They will claim that all 4 million immigrants, the Hindus, Indians are Hindus, and that they are represented, which is a lie.
That's why there needs to be a strengthening and and I know there's some activity with the Hindus for Human Rights. That's a group that has been in the recent, last year they've formed and they're doing excellent
Exactly.
work. But even they come from and I've talked to them about this for a long time, is that they come from a very outside the tradition point of view. They're not coming from within the mainstream Hindu thought or the mainstream temples in the United States. So that is what is of concern. Like, for example, if I'm sitting over here, and we've talked about this, like, and these are labels that are put on us, but to explain to a lot of audience, like when it comes from on the spectrum, someone like me will be on the conservative side, but yet I can still come and even in my conservatism in Islam, I can still come and be on the table with you, because it's coming from within the faith. When you're going to come at the faith, like with Hindus for Human Rights too, they're coming from like, we need to change the faith and that sort of, and so that's trouble. They'll not be taken seriously by the people that they're trying to influence, by the people who are running the mosque, running the temples here in the United States or overseas. So, but I was talking to Sunita about this, and one of the things that they are looking at is talking to Orthodox priests, Hindu priests in India, to counter this narrative of hate. And this is so supremely important because, I mean, that's something that we found in even in Burma when the genocidal monks were talking about Rohingya Muslims, and before the genocide took place, that the strength of monks speaking up against it, you have to counter it from within. It can't be coming from outside. Like you said earlier, there is just certain things that we can highlight over here, but that change has to come from within the community.
India is still a united, I mean, they call it Union of India, or they will call, in those days, they would call All India. Even the radio, when before the television, when the radio news comes up, they will say All India Radio. There is a reason why they call it an All India Radio, because there is no one India. And fortunately, the majority of the people still, of all faiths, still believe in moderation. And particularly, I know several Hindu high-ranking religious leaders who denounce the venom that's put out by the RSS's ideology of a Hindu state. They consider that as very anti-Hindu, very non-Hindu, or un-Hindu, if you will. But the problem is they don't get the limelight. They don't create. Um, they don't make news. So there is no evening news about them. People don't go in large numbers to listen to them, but they are there. Without them, India would not be what it is. I mean, India would have broken up a long time back. And that same thing goes here also. I know very few Hindus that would, well, for example, one guy one time, this is quite a few years ago, he's a doctor, his wife is a doctor, well-to-do people. And there was some event. I go to this event, and he comes and he start talking to me, and he is from Gujarat, evidently. And he asked me my name, and I said John Prabhudas, and he said, Prabhudas is a great name, it's a good name, beautiful. But why do you have this John? That kind of a response you can expect only from a Northern Indian. Not from anyone in the South India. They will never ask you such a question. And that shows the mentality, the mindset of the people. That's the venom that's seeping into the, and when you even in the Kudan, the Satangulam twin murder of father and son, when we have a Tamil group, and they are Hindus, Muslims, everybody are in it. And when we discussed that thing with them, there was a point. One of the people in the phone call suggested that why don't the churches issue a statement immediately? Some Hindus in that group, they said, if you take it as a Christian issue, you are doing yourself a disfavor, because the support that you are getting now is not because he is a Christian or anything. It's because it was grossly, violently inhuman. I mean, it's very what's the word I'm looking for? It's vulgar. The amount of cruelty that that couple had gone through. So and there's a lot of those people are here in the U.S. But you know what? They don't show up in the rallies. They don't show up in the meetings. They're the silent majority. The silent majority of the Hindus do not support the wide, and that is what I tell the political parties here, both the Democratic and the Republican parties. Do not ever think that by supporting Modi that you are going to get the support of the majority of the Hindus in America. You will not. If at all anything, you are going to be shunned by them because you are supporting an ideology that 90% of the people do not agree with. But they are not the one that you hear in the public forum, in the public
so that's what we need to do. And as we wrap up this hour, that's what perhaps we need to do, is we need to shine light and bring those voices up and uplift their voices, because that's the voice of sanity. That's the voice that will save India from fascism, from imploding, from genocide. So thank you so much, John, for being with us today. And we hope to continue working together and to stop this. And so India becomes that safe place that we I remember my summers, my dad would take us every other summer, and just wonderful memories. And so we want those memories back for everybody. So thank you so much for being here today. Salam alaikum to everybody. I hope you're watching us on Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 24/7. Salam alaikum.